difference. Okay.
To teach how to make and receive offers. And I know, Jimmy, I know you're experienced. Isaac, I don't know your experience level yet. And Eric, I know you're just getting started, but you're working with your dad, you're working on what I call James gang, the routine thing. Like I said, I'm an old man.
With a dry sense of humor.
I love it.
I'm usually in the office around 5:50 in the morning, and I will stay till around 10 or 11. And then go home and work from home in the afternoon, so you can reach me by phone, text, or whatever, up until about 7 at night. So if you ever have any questions and can't reach anybody else, find me and we'll figure out a way to make it work. So making and receive offers is obviously the backbone of your business. And that's where you're gonna start, that's where you're gonna end up making your income, which I assume is why all of you are in here. So we start with the buyer agency contract, and we'll go over that in depth in a minute after I run through the rest of these first two pages. Oh, and I'm kind of an open guy. If you have any questions, please stop me, please ask. Because that's the only way I know that I'm not going over your head or that I'm not skipping something that you have a question about. But the only dumb question you'll ask him here is, why is this guy teaching? But other than that, there are no dumb questions.
You have the most knowledge in this room right now. You have lots of knowledge. Sorry, I'm just gonna be your sidekick today. He doesn't give himself enough credit. That's what I'm gonna say.
Right, you. Why?
Yes, yeah.
And her husband's also an excellent source of, especially with
Seniors.
seniors. Yeah.
I'll be speaking next week at the business meeting on that panel. We have a senior, helping seniors panel next week. Yeah.
That's a great guy, so she'll learn a lot. Okay, so you get your buyer agency contract in place, then you can start sending listings and whatnot to your buyers, having a chance to get to know them. A lot of people do buyer consultations first before they'll ever take a buyer out. Kristen, are we teaching buyer consultation?
You mean,
Anything?
yeah, we should be, tomorrow. Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Oh, I have to look, but because the schedule moves around sometimes, but yeah.
So you'll get a whole class on how to do the buyer consultation, and you'll find out what they can do and what they can't do and what they will do and what they won't do. And I literally at one time in my career showed a couple about 100 houses. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. And I finally figured out the problem. Well, they were friends of mine, and so I didn't try to pry too much. Found out that the wife wanted a colonial, my husband wanted a ranch, and I never got the memo on that. So that's why we showed so many houses. That never happened the second time. So you will learn about your buyers and you'll learn what they will do and what they won't do when they say they're in it for investment purposes. Ask them to what level you're willing to do a fix and repair on a home. Whether you go all the way down to a broken foundation or whether you're just gonna do window repairs or whatever, but when they say they're an investor and they want fixer-uppers, find out what level of fixer-upper they're ever talking about before you start showing them a lot. So that's just all part of getting to know your clients, and then talk to the lender if you can about what the buyer can and cannot afford and what their loan type is going to be. Because when you're writing your offer, you'll base your offer price based on the loan type that they're going to have, among other things. And your advice will be based on that. For example, if they can only go FHA and VA have a lot of extra requirements in them. So if the house is a fixer-upper, most likely it won't support an FHA or a VA loan. And so if your clients are only going to go FHA or VA, you're going to want to show them better houses, at least better condition houses, not necessarily price better, but better condition. Get the pre-approval letter because there's so much competition right now in buyers. Come on in, Crystal.
And I'll get you a name plate too. Okay. Hmm.
We're still on the first page right there. And one thing that, what I discovered is that if you're not using the correct form, the current form, then if there ever is a problem, then Doug or myself has to figure out what form we used and what that document actually says. And the revisions that they make every year or sometimes twice a year are for your benefit. So make sure you're using 2026 forms on everything. And the form number is usually at the bottom right of the document, the year, the revised revision. And then your broker fee on lines 91 to 93 of the purchase agreement, that's the only place you're going to get paid. You can put it in further conditions, and my advice is put it in both places, but make sure that it gets on there. Because if you skip that and you submit an offer like that without having your compensation on there, and the seller happens to accept it, then you're gonna be working for free unless you can get that amended somehow. Do a net sheet so the buyers can see what they're asking for. Most of the title companies, including Summit Title, have a place where you can do a net sheet online. And that way, when you tell your buyer, okay, you're gonna be offering, the house is listed at 250 and you're gonna be offering 200, well, in addition to that, the first thing the listing agent's gonna do a net sheet on your offer of 200 and say, okay, the broker fee is this much, title fees are this much. The survey is gonna cost this much, this is what the seller's gonna net. And so if you do that for your buyers as well as your sellers, then the buyers can see what their offer really looks like, that it's not really a 200 offer. It's more of a 190 offer or something on that order. And that way the buyer can say, well, I want to start off really low and see what the seller will do. Well, in most cases, the seller's going to reject that offer automatically if it's too low. Or you'll end up in a multiple offer situation or whatever. Come on in. This is Mary.
Yep.
Welcome, Mary.
Let me move this. And then, yeah, if you could just get used to signing in each class, that would be great.
And Eric, if you could show Mary where we are on this thing. You're fine. Okay, and Todd Dankman, I think, is gonna be teaching the net sheet. And typically, you can do them on the title company websites, but it's a good idea to learn what that involves, what the net sheet involves. So learn how to do it manually, even if you never do it manually, at least you'll know exactly what's on that thing, and you can explain it to your buyers and sellers better. When you send the offer to the listing site, be sure you include your addendums, like the first right, the backup escalation clause, limited purchase agreement, seller disclosure, lead-based pay, whatever you happen to have, whatever's gonna be on there. We'll talk about some of these when we get into the form section. But make sure you put the whole thing in there, and on further conditions on the purchase agreement, then you will put in there attached addendums made part of this contract. Or some kind of a line like that, to where the seller knows that the whole package is what they're being offered, not just the purchase agreement, but that it also includes all the above. And that's especially true if you're doing a first right or a backup offer. Then once you get the offer put together, you counter back and forth on what you do and don't want. With the purchase agreement, which we'll talk about in a minute, after we get through the buyer agency contract. But with the purchase agreement, when you counter something, everything you don't counter is considered accepted. So if you put on their purchase price to be 100,000, we're going to ask the seller for inspections, the VA inspection, the FHA inspection, to pay for a termite inspection, those kind of things. This broker's gonna ask for so much percentage for themselves as income and all everything else. Then if you counter back, seller will not pay for inspections, then you've accepted everything else. But when you get into the contract to close part, which Heather Spinner will teach, the inspection negotiation is just the opposite. With an inspection thing, if you list 10 items that you want repaired, seller comes back and says, we're only gonna fix 3 items, you don't get the other 7. But with a purchase agreement, it's just the opposite. What's not countered is accepted. And with an inspection agreement, what is countered is the only thing you're gonna do. So keep that in the back of your mind when you get into the contract and inspection negotiations. And most of the things that we talk about like that, that the teachers emphasize is because the teacher has a hole in the backside from having made those mistakes. So yes, I did, not twice.
Very true.
I'm an agent in here,
Very true.
experienced agent, been in the business more than 6 hours. That hasn't bought a basketball goal or a refrigerator or an air conditioner, so. Including yours here. Okay, then make sure after it's all put together that you send it immediately to the lender, and the lender will order the appraisal. If the buyer has selected the title company, then it's up to the buyer's agent to send the purchase agreement to the title company. If the, sorry about that, I forgot that wasn't on something. Let me just take care of that. Don't miss your inspection deadlines, and then from then on, once you get the purchase agreement accepted, then you're gonna be working on contract to close. And you'll be working directly with the lenders, with the inspectors, with everybody else on the team, so to speak, to make sure that you get your deadlines met and make sure that you get the closing on time. I'm just putting my phone on silent. About that. Okay. Then, moving on to receiving offers, assuming that you're on the listing side. Check the response time. The last page of the purchase agreement has a time for responses to be made. And if you don't miss that, then the offer is considered null and void. If you miss the response time on the inspections are considered to be accepted. So if you don't counter the inspection, then you've automatically agreed to do all 10 items or whatever they've asked for. But on a purchase agreement, again, it's just the opposite. If you don't meet the time for acceptance, then the offer is null and void, and you get to start over. First thing you do for your sellers is you should do a net sheet. Buyer's offering X. They want a home warranty. They want you to pay all the HOA's dues prior to closing. They want you to do this and that and the other. And so the listing agent, if you're the listing agent, the first thing you're going to do is do a net sheet for your seller, and then you'll send or sit down with your seller and say, this is what they're asking for. This is what you'll net. This is what's negotiable. Where do we go from here? And, you know, is this acceptable or not? In my opinion, my professional opinion, and you will say something on that order, that this is a good offer, we can, or we should counter here, or this is totally not worth your time. I've seen the proof of funds letter and it's no good. We can reject this and start over, or we're gonna go ahead and counter. But that's up to you as the professional real estate agent to advise your clients as to what they should and shouldn't do. And you will get to know your seller as well as your buyers by having those consultations with them and seeing what they need to do. For example, if I was your client, you would know that I'm an older gentleman. I use that word loosely in my case. And my next move will be into more of an over 55 home. And so my needs and my desires are a whole lot different than a younger buyer who, this is just another step. Mine would be the last step, and it's gonna move will most likely be the last step. Until my daughters put me in a home. Which some days, more than agreeable. Bring it on. Okay, so each individual seller is different and each one will have different needs and different desires. You will see the purchase agreement and be able to judge that accordingly and be able to advise them with your professional background. And this is your value added to the transaction. This is why for sale by owners do not make up 100% of the market, because the buyers and sellers still, for the most part, still want your advice and make sure your advice is worth having. If you're gonna do multiple offers, if you're working with one seller and you get 3 or 4 offers or even 2 or more offers on a home, you may want to do a multiple offer situation, and I've got that in your packet here. We'll talk about it when we get to those. But basically, a multiple offer tells the buyers to send to each buyer agent that we've received multiple offers on the home, and we're going to negotiate them all next Sunday on July 25th or whatever the day be. So give us your highest and best offer by then. And some buyers will back off, some will send you another offer, some will stay where they are. But that's one way to handle multiple offers. If you're doing that, if you get multiple offers and you want to ask for highest and best, then be sure you use the form. And you may get multiple offers where you see that one of them is just heads and tails above the others, and you want to accept that you can do that too, and just reject the others. But if none of them meet your seller criteria totally, or their wants and desires, then maybe it's a good idea to use the multiple offer form. Okay. Again, when it closes or when it pins, I mean, when you get an offer accepted, that's when you start working with the title companies and lenders and inspectors and everybody else to make sure that things get done. When you're doing VA and FHA, you're going to have the regular inspection, but you're also going to have an FHA and a VA inspection too on top of that. So you need to make sure the timing for all this stuff meets the constraints of the purchase agreement, that you can get to the closing table without any glitches. The purchase agreement pretty much runs or maintains, if you will, sets the parameters for everything you're going to be doing from that point on. Okay, buyer tenant exclusive agency contract. This is where it all starts when you're working with the buyers. You do not show homes. You do not send out listings. You do not accept them as a client without getting this 4-page form signed. And it has to be signed by me or Doug as well. Oh, to go back to the first page, I wrote on there the KLRW 393 at kw.com website. That's where you would send anything that you need a managing broker to sign, and 99% of the time it's going to be me. So you submit this form, you submit your changes, you submit everything else through that needs a managing broker signature through that website, and that way Doug or myself can look at it and sign it, go over it and sign it. If you send it to my personal website, then if I'm ever offline for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, Doug doesn't know to check it, so you may not get, and if it's sent to my personal website, you'll never see it anyway. Or Doug will never see them. So please use that for anything needing a managing broker signature. If you're asking for Doug's advice or my advice, you can send it to our personal site, but even then, I'd still prefer to use the KLRW 393 at kw.com website or email. Again, if I'm ever offline, and I do have at my age, I've got doctor appointments about once or twice a month, so I'm offline for 2 or 3 hours. And I can notify Doug to please watch those, watch that email and sign the documents accordingly. Okay. I don't do commission advances, so if you've got a commission advance that you need a managing broker signature for, then you'll have to go directly through Doug. And Jennifer O'Neill will also get involved in that, but I don't sign those. All right, to go over the buyer tenant exclusive agency contract, Jenny, I know you've done some, Mary, I know you have too. Have you done them, Crystal? We had this form, use this form, yeah.
No.
Okay. That's fine, I just wanna know where everybody is. And Eric, I haven't seen anything come through with your name yet, so, okay, you were fine. I just didn't, are you familiar with it? Okay. Good. Some of the things that I see, when I review these, you'll send this to me for my signature. And then once you get a purchase agreement put together, then you'll submit that through command. And you'll put the buyer agency contract in there with it. A lot of times, the only reason I will send them back to you is like if the start date and the end date are not there, or they don't cover the period of time that your contract involves. For example, if you put a start date in there of March 1st, but you wrote a purchase agreement of February 25th, then the contract is not in effect for your purchase agreement, and I will send it back to you, asking you to do an amendment to change the date to coincide or go before your purchase agreement. To amend it or to amend the purchase agreement itself, the contract date, because that has the purchase agreement has to be within the parameters of the buyer exclusive agency contract. Okay. Same way that if you started it in July of 25 and you've been sending your clients listings and whatnot, but you haven't gotten a managing broker signature on there, then the first thing I'm gonna do is ask you to sign that and hope that you haven't done any purchase agreements in the meantime. The real estate commission takes a very dim view of this not being in alignment and not being on top of everything that you're doing when you're working with a buyer. It's okay. So start date, the end date on line 7 are critical. Contract, like the purchase agreement, like the listing contract, shall automatically be extended to coincide with the closing date if the closing date is after the expiration date. So assuming you've got a pending put together, it was on line 9 for that. Assuming that you've got a purchase agreement put together and the closing and this buyer exclusive agency contract expires before the closing date, the buyer exclusive agency contract is still in effect until the closing of the property. Section A, starting with line 11, the buyer agrees and acknowledges that the buyer has no current buyer agency agreement. And it goes on to say that if they do, they can end up paying 2 commissions. So make sure that when you're having your buyer consultation, that they're not working with any other agent at the time. And one of the ways to do that is ask them if they've ever seen this, and if so, have they ever signed one of these? And if they say no, then you're probably safe to work with them as a buyer. But make sure that they haven't been shown any other houses by a buyer's agent or anybody else for that matter before this thing is in play. Okay, I keep waiting for hands to go up, but either I'm great or you're all asleep. So see what which it is, because there is a quiz at the end. Line 18. The broker shall act in the client's best interest during the term of this contract. Oftentimes in further conditions, I will see things like the broker will do the best work they can for the client, and they'll put that in further conditions when it's already stated in here. That's okay, because sometimes you get buyers that are a little nervous. They don't want to sign one of these. They've never had to do it before. This is fairly new, July of 24, I believe, is when it hit. Is that right? Okay. I took that out of the year, but good air in here. Yeah, I'm kidding. We went through a lot of grief from the early part of 2024 until it finally went into place. But a lot of buyers don't want to sign a buyer agency contract. They'll be driving through a neighborhood, they'll see a yard sign. They'll call the listing agent. I just want to see this house. I don't want to be obligated to anybody. So you can fill it in that the start date and the end date are the same date. You can still do that. And then under scope on C, you can put in a very specific address. And that will tell that buyer that you're gonna let them out of the contract, that it only applies to showing them that this one home. But they will agree that if they write a purchase agreement, that you will extend the expiration date of the contract to cover the period of in the close. Okay. So a lot of them get nervous, because again, they don't want to sign another contract, they just want to see if the house has a pool. And you can't legally show them that house without having one of these in place. So if you make it for 2 days or a month or whatever and get very specific under the scope, then that gives them a little more at ease, if you will. But let them know that if they do write a purchase agreement on that home, that you expect to be their agent. All right, broker's compensation, scope can be anything like $500,000 homes in the Hamilton Southeastern School District, or can be 123 Main Street, or it can be any home in Marion County that an investor wants between $50,000 to $100,000. I mean, you can put, the scope is pretty open. When you get Doug in here to explain the purchase agreement better, ask him to explain to you the scope. Because he's a lot more knowledgeable about that, and he has a lot more specifics than I do on it. As far as I'm concerned, it's pretty wide open. Okay. Broker's compensation, the retainer fee is rare, but what that says is that the buyer is going to give you X number of dollars on a retainer fee, and it's not coming back to the buyer. So if the buyer should walk away without ever buying a home, that retainer fee is retained by the company and is given back to you for your contract with Keller Williams. So whatever split you have, it goes through there. It's not used very often, but it is used when you've shown a buyer 10 houses, 20 houses, they can't make up their mind, they can't narrow their search. And you realize that they're just looking, they're not really serious about buying anything. You might use it in that kind of under that criteria to show that I'm happy to work with you. However, we're not going to go out and look at 10 more houses without there being some kind of skin in the game on the side of the buyer. Again, there's only, I think, 1 or 2 agents in the company that use it with every buyer. Most everybody else uses it on an only as needed basis. That's between you and your clients, whether you choose to use that or not. The good thing about it is that if you do use a retainer fee and they buy a house, then that comes off of their commission owed to you. So it's still a win-win for the buyer if they choose to go through you and buy them and purchase a home. Line 35, the compensation. Part of this broker, starting with 35, 34. Buyer also agrees to pay broker compensation of, that's a flat fee. The first blank is a flat fee. So if they say, and that's different from a net sale that you've heard about in your license class on listing price. That's not what we're talking about here. Typically, the flat fee is used on the lower end properties of the investor properties, the 20,000 or less, or on dirt lots and lands where the sale price of the home is only 5,000. You're not going to ask for 3% on a $5,000 sale of land. You're going to ask for a flat fee to help the buyer acquire that property. Typically, though, what is happened is where you will fill in your blank is on the percentage. So that's where you're going to ask for the percentage of the sale price to be your commission. Now, if you are offering X%, if you're asking for your client to pay X% of the commission, and the seller is only gonna offer a 0.5% less than that. After you get the purchase agreement put together, then you will probably want to amend this down to that other percentage that the seller's offering, because otherwise. This says that the seller owes you that extra 0.5%, or the buyer does, I'm sorry. So if you're asking for X and the seller offers X minus 5 or 0.5, then you're gonna want to amend this after you get the purchase agreement put together. The last one on there is a minimum dollars, and we've already talked about that, but that's where you would put in your flat fee or your minimum. They're kind of the same thing on that. So if the seller, or if your buyer is looking at investment properties and looking at 5 or 6 of them between, say, $5,000 for the condemned homes, and yes, I've sold those. To the 25, 30,000, you're gonna put in a minimum, you're probably gonna put in a flat fee. You might also use the percentage. And that way the seller knows that, the buyer knows that you're gonna be asking for $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 commission, whatever it is, at a minimum. Okay. Put it on a flat fee, that's all you're gonna get. So be careful how you work that. Sir?
If you put it as a percentage, you don't have to fill that out, do you?
No, you don't. And again, typically that's when you're looking at the low end stuff, that you're gonna wanna do that. You can, yeah, it's a good idea to do that. You work with Kyle. And you're gonna have different rules about that on your team, those of you who are on teams, and 3 of you are. Your teams are gonna have different ways now. They want you to fill in the flat fee or the minimum commission or whatever. Putting in a blank is always a good idea. Line 42 on the first page of this says that buyers shall remain obligated to broker for the difference, which we just talked about. Broker may not receive compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer. So if you know that, for example, you're doing new construction and the new construction seller is gonna offer you a bonus of $3,000 or $3,000 or $5,000, whatever. And then you would put in further conditions, broker to receive the extra builder compensation as well as the amount agreed to on line 35. But that's only when you're being offered like an extra bonus, because what that says is that you cannot get paid more than what's on there in line 35 or 36, whatever it is. Talks about the next few lines at the top of page 3. Believe it or not, we're moving pretty good. It seems like we're bogged down on this, but it's moving pretty good. The next few lines talks about what happens if the buyer defaults or whatever and goes to somebody else. Line 68, or that section there, broker compensation for services rendered is not set by law. So if somebody calls you up and says, well, what's the going rate in Indianapolis? Well, there is no such thing. And that will be your answer. Everybody negotiates their own percentage. Kristen, to my knowledge, we don't have a company for base on this anymore.
Oh, what? Sorry.
We used to, a company percentage
I'm sorry, buyers.
compensation.
I don't think so.
Yeah, we haven't had for a couple of years. I still report to James, the interim team leader, about what buyers are charging, but
It's not so that he can see that you're not coming up with the company minimum, because right now there isn't such thing. So again, those of you on teams will be going to whatever your team suggests or requests that you put on there. If you're not on a team, like two of you are not, then it's whatever you and your buyer agree to. And again, that's gonna be negotiated in the purchase agreement anyway. And so whatever you agree to on here, I know I've said it 5 times already, but you're gonna want to amend down to this. If the purchase agreement comes in a little bit lower than what you put on. Okay. Agency disclosures, section E, which is this form. It starts with this, Kristen has put this together for us. This one's 2024, as I said earlier, don't use this one, use the 2026, but I couldn't see any point in recopying this. But it's got the other agency agreements in there, and it's got lead-based paint in there, it's got mold in there, and all those other documents that you will need. So make sure that you are using, in addition to the 4-page buyer agency agreement, that you're also using the buyer handbook. With sellers, you would use the seller handbook. Okay. Buyer acknowledges, I'm on line 74. Buyer acknowledges receipt of a copy of the written offer policy regarding agency. The rest of section E talks about what agency is and how it works. The next section, starting in 105, talks about limited agency. We all know what limited agency is, but in this company, you know how it works. That basically you can't say anything, you can't give advice to either side. If you happen to break out of limited agency, or you find a buyer that doesn't agree to limited agency, then if the buyer is working with you, that's fine. Then you can walk away from it that way, or you can make sure that you don't show the buyer any homes that you're listed. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the next forms. Yeah, the way this company policy is, any transaction that you have with Doug Fredbeck as the managing broker, I mean, this part is law, is considered limited agency. For those of you on teams, if Mary had the buy side and Kyle had the list side of of the same contract, then they would be considered limited agency. Isaac, same with anybody on the James team that you work with. Being virtue. Sorry, my mind keeps going back to James game. I'm sorry. I was teasing about him and Chris about that the other morning. They don't have a Wild West background. I don't know why, but apparently that wasn't on their real estate exam, but you had to know who Jesse James was. Things they don't teach kids anymore. You already know I'm crazy. They're learning. All right. But one point I want to point out to you is line 90 under agency disclosure. And it's also under limited agency, is disclosing to the buyer adverse material fact or risk actually known by the licensee concerning the real estate transaction. So if you are working with a buyer and you go through a home, and this happened to me, where I noticed there were pipes sticking up out of the ground. I was working with a seller. And I said, I asked the seller, do you have buried oil tanks? And I recognized it because I knew what the pipes coming out of the ground were for. And they said, yes. I said, well, do you heat with oil? No. I said, okay, and then we're going to disclose that the property has buried oil tanks, fuel tanks. The seller, who was also a licensed agent in referrals, said, no, we're not going to disclose that. I said, no, I'm not going to list your home, because you as a real estate agent and your sellers have to disclose known defects. In the home, regardless of whether you're going through limited agency or normal. Right. Okay, so if you're walking through a house and you notice the sill plates in the basement or the crawl, you're looking into the crawl space. And you happen to notice that the sill plates are all chewed up. Then you would need to tell your clients there's a very good possibility that this home has a wood boring insect infestation. And we need to have that checked and we need to go through the inspection process with that in mind. So, you know, if you're, again, walking through a house and you see wires sticking up out of the wall where an outlet used to be, but the bare wires are still there, it's still your obligation to point those out to your client, for the seller or buyer, and saying this is a hazardous condition. And we do need to take that into consideration when we are negotiating purchase from either side. Okay. But you're all recent graduates, and I don't remember when you got out of license class. Okay, 25, okay. So you still should be familiar with limited agency. One thing I forgot to say at the start of this is when you're filling out these forms, make sure you understand them. Because the worst thing that can happen is when you're sitting down with clients, I have no clue what that means when they call my broker. Well, you can do that, and at least you're being honest about it, but it makes you look more professional if you've got a good understanding. So in your spare time, whatever that looks like to all of us, then read through these forms and make sure you understand them before you ask your buyer or your seller to sign them. If you don't understand it, call me, call Doug, call your team leader. Find any of us and we'll be glad to help you through it. Line 122, limited agency authorization is or is not allowed. So again, if your buyer on this one happens to choose not to go through limited agency, then you want to make sure that you're not showing them any of Doug Fredbeck's homes or any of your team's homes. And tell them that. You're saying by selecting no, then I am limited and that I cannot show you these type of homes or these homes listed by these agents. And let them know that that's why, that's what happens when they select them. Consent to represent other buyers. It's possible that if you as a buyer's agent, if you like, for example, working with investors, that you're gonna have several clients looking at the same house at the same time. And this gives you permission to do that. It'll happen if you're working with first-time buyers, probably not on the $1 million homes, but it could. So if you are showing the same house to different buyers, different clients, this gives you permission to do that. And going back to limited agency, if you do limited agency, please also use the limited agency form. It's in the listing contract that the seller has to agree to limited agency. It's in the buyer contract that they have to agree to limited agency. But I still like to see the form where both parties have signed it. Recordings of the property, keep in mind that a lot of people now are doing that they are recording and everything in there, and everyone that comes in there. So be sure that you're not talking about, well, I'll offer X, but I won't go a dime higher, because that could be recorded. So do all your buyer consultation outside of the home itself. And that's one of the few I haven't gotten bid on. Well, that's not true. The buyer and the sellers were sitting in their living room. And they had to sell because one of them was on their deathbed, literally. But my buyer said, this is the worst kitchen I've ever seen, and I will never accept a house like this. Well, the sellers happened to hear that. And so we did not get one dime off the sale price of that house. We got the house, but it was for full list price. So just be careful. Fair housing. I assume everybody in here wants to be in real estate or you wouldn't be sitting here. But if you decide that your career is over, violate fair housing. That is the fastest way to get out of real estate. And I'm half teasing, but I'm half not. If you violate fair housing, you will be drawn before the board. Life will not be pleasant for you. So it's not a good idea. It's not nice. Just don't do it. Confidentiality, keep in mind that, the term of munitions that you're offering could be disclosed to other agents. If somebody says, well, how much do I have to beat that house or beat the sale price? And the seller's agent happens to say, I've got an offer for X number of dollars and they're asking for an inspection and they're asking for a warranty and whatnot. That may or may not stay confidential. So just keep it in the back of your mind. Further, attorney, legal disclaimer is what it is. Attorney's fees, you could be liable, your seller could be liable, your buyer could be liable. Wire fraud, we have had in this company agents who have given out wiring instructions. It's not a good idea. In one case, it actually the funds were wired to the Cayman Islands, at least half of the money was. And so there were multiple transactions, dominoes, that fell apart because they couldn't get the money back out of what they lost by false wiring instructions. So always put your buyers, have them put the lender and the title company in direct communication, not emails, not text, but direct phone to phone communication for the wiring instructions. That's the safest way to keep them getting bid on that one. And then we do have some agents in the company who, in further conditions, will put in things like buyer will not pay the commission, seller will pay. Well, they're doing that because the buyer has already told the agent that there's no way they're gonna pay the commission. And that's fine. There's other ways to get around that. The problem is you don't know for sure if the seller's gonna pay the commission or not until you negotiate the purchase agreement. So if you put in there, seller will pay the commission, what happens if they don't? If you negotiate the purchase agreement, and you get all the way through the negotiations and the seller, it comes down to the fact that the seller will not pay, the buyer has told you they will not pay. How do you handle that? Well, at that point, it's kind of too late. So don't put that in there, put more of the fact that buyer's agent will do their very best to make sure that the seller pays the commission or something on that order. If you're gonna do that, and it's already in this thing anyway. Again, read through the 4 pages and then you'll be better equipped to put in further conditions, anything that really needs to be in there. Man,
How do you work the commission into the seller?
it's on the purchase agreement.
Work into the purchase price? Or done,
Yeah, Doug will answer. That's a great question from Doug when he comes in here. But to answer your question on a simple price basis, a simple kind of guy. If you want the commission to be part of the purchase agreement, and be part of the sale price. Well, that's when the seller would, the seller's agent will do will do a net sheet with the seller. Is that they want X number of dollars in broker compensation. And they're offering X number of dollars in price for the home. So the way to get that kind of work in together would be that we will counter on bus and such. And we're gonna counter the purchase price to be a little bit higher, which would fold in the broker compensation. So you would agree to the broker compensation of X% or X dollars or whatever it is. And then you would adjust your sale price to accordingly. If that makes any sense. Good, because don't ask me to repeat it. It's something on the fly there. Yeah, but that's how you do it.
With that one, the other one. If buyer can't pay the commission.
Right. You're asking the seller to pay it anyway.
Mhm.
Well, in the old days, we used to put on the, BLC or the MLS, some people still call it. What the buyer, what the seller was willing to pay, the buyer side, but that's been outlawed. So now we just put on there, now it's negotiable and purchase agreement, it didn't used to be. Or it's still not there yet. What other, where else am I missing?
I don't know, I just read a lot in Facebook about. And real estate groups.
Ugh. And everything on there is accurate. But that's how you do it. You put it in what you counter on the purchase agreement. For the balance. Or other terms and conditions, I mean, you still would put broker compensation to be X%. But you would put seller will not pay the home warranty or whatever. And that way the seller net would rise in that they don't have to pay the $600 or whatever. For a home warranty, so they're getting 600 more. Dollars out of it, if they counter off the home warranty, for example. And so they're basically the seller looking at their net. Whatever that's due.
And, like the mortgage company, they don't pay the increasing the interest rate.
Well, then you get into the part of will it appraise or not. Yeah. Yeah, so if we're talking about cash. It's probably not an issue unless the cash sale is going to also have an appraisal. But and if you're talking about a small amount, it's not gonna matter that much in the appraisal could. But it probably won't. But if you're talking about a lot of money, then you're gonna have to go back and revisit commissions with your buyer and with the offer that they're putting in. Okay, on page 4 of the buyer agency contract. On line 179 says parties, but to go above that. This contract contains the entire agreement and can only be changed in writing. And signed by all parties. So when I mentioned earlier that you may want to adjust your purchase, your contract, your 4-page contract. This is where you would use the addendum or the amendment on that. And you would say that we have one agent who only does properties listed in the scope. He will list every single property that he's gonna show. And so if he shows them another property, then the first thing he does is send me an amendment saying scope to include 123 Main Street. And we'll adjust it that way. If you're not doing it like that, if you're not listing every single property that you're gonna show, then you would put sale or scope to include not just Marion County investment homes, but also Hamilton County investment homes or whatever. If you're adjusting the percentage that you're gonna charge the buyer, if you're asking your buyer for X and the seller is only offering X minus 5 or X minus 1, then you would put commission on line 38 or 37, whatever it was, to be thus and such, and you would do that amendment or addendum. And then the next page is what happens when your buyer wants out of the contract, and that's what this form is for. So, if you're tired of working with your buyer, if you realize that, they're not really serious about buying a home, that you might originate this. If they call you up and say, hey, we just got a job in Springfield, Illinois, and we're no longer in the market, you can let the contract ride and let it expire naturally, but if it's pushed out a ways, you might want to go ahead and do a release so that they can go ahead and buy a home in Illinois or wherever they're going. So there's a lot of reasons to use this form, just keep in mind that it does exist. And that's why I put it in your packet. Purchase agreement, Doug will go over this extensively. One thing.
Yes,
And Doug and I agree on virtually 100% of the way this works, and it doesn't matter anyway, because I work for Doug. So, and Doug's got a lot of wisdom. I tease him what little he can teach that. But I try to teach him every so often about this, but he's got a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge, and so I go to him when I have questions too. But what I want to cover as far as the purchase and the contract, making and receiving offers, we're in excellent shape on tonight. Or full things like, for example, the buyer, this is not Joe Smith, this would be Joseph I. Smith or Joseph S. Smith or whatever. You don't put Joey on here. Don't use nicknames, don't use, like, for example, my name. You're gonna see me as Charles, you're gonna see me as Mark, you'll see me as Charles M. But if I was filling out this purchase agreement for myself, I would put Charles M. Osman and Jane E. Osman if my wife and I were buying a home. So don't use, Bud and Sally, because that's not gonna work. The title company wants to know what the legal names are. The lender wants to know what the legal names are. The recorder of the county that you buy is gonna wanna see what the legal names are. So that's what you can put in here. The property, fill it out as best you can. Smart home issues, I think Doug will probably talk about this tomorrow, but keep in mind when you're making your offer and you writing up this purchase agreement, that you put in there seller to supply all market all smart home devices, passwords, usernames and everything else, because the worst thing that can happen to a buyer is a seller closes and hand you the keys to the front door. The house has a lot of smart devices in it and you can't activate or unactivate anything. And the seller then can still call up the cameras and see what's going on in the house. So you want to make sure that those things are at least reset. And that as soon as the seller gives you the password, that you go to the home immediately after closing and change the password even before you move in. Smart homes are going to be even more important, or knowing how to use those. I was on the forms committee for a little while with my board, and they're thinking about either amending the purchase agreement to cover them or coming up with a separate addendum to the purchase agreement. It's getting that serious.
Where would you add that? In this?
Line 17 and 18, those blanks right there. Then excludes anything you don't like about the house or anything you don't want. For example, they've got a playhouse that was built for 5 and 6 year olds, and you're moving in there with your 2 teenage 17 daughters or son and daughter. You don't want to deal with the playhouse. You don't want to spend or call 1-800-GOT-JUNK and spend $1,000 to get them to tear out the playhouse. So you would put things like seller to remove playhouse. Right there. What is a goalrilla? Anybody know what a goalrilla is? Okay, it is a freestanding basketball goal. It usually sits in the driveway. Is it part of the house or not? Some say yes, some say no. I could take you to some agent's office, not far from here, who bought a goalrilla about 2 years ago. Because it wasn't specified, and the only way to get the thing to closing. Well, I shouldn't close, but it happened after closing, that the only way to stay out of court is to go ahead and buy them a goalrilla. So the seller or the buyer's agent bought a goalrilla. This is where you get specific. If you see it, name it in here. And don't rely just on, well, it's not attached. Well, is it or isn't it? I mean, it weighs 300 pounds. Is it now not attached? Anyway, to be sure, name what you do want, name what you don't want. in those, lines there. Line 23, the terms of this agreement will determine what items are included or excluded, not the seller disclosure form. So if the seller disclosure form says that one thing, it says that the chandeliers stay, or they're part of the fixtures. But the purchase agreement says they go, then they go. So the purchase agreement overrides the seller disclosure form. The price on line C, it talks about US dollars or US currency or whatever. It's so that you don't have to get into a conversion rate. There are some markets in America that are using euros and even Bitcoin to get a lot of out of the country investors buying homes here as rentals. And they're used to using the euros, but that won't work here. They have to use in US dollars. And so this puts the onus on them to make sure that their conversion rate is strictly up to them and it's not between buyer and seller. Bitcoin is only going to get stronger as the years go on. It's not legally allowed here yet for purchase agreements, but keep it in the back of your mind, someday it will be. The earnest money, and I'm sure Doug will talk about this, it's negotiable. You're gonna hear in real estate circles that it's 1%, it's not. The earnest money is totally negotiable, just like the purchase price, just like the home warranty, just like everything else in the purchase agreement. So if your buyer is credit rich but cash poor, they're gonna put down a small amount of earnest money. And the worst thing you can do is say, well, it's not legal, it's always 1%. No, it's not. It's whatever is negotiated between the buyer and seller. The 90-day letter, I'm sorry, 60-day letter. If you put together a purchase agreement and you agree that the listing agent is going to hold the earnest money, and you get that all put together, then if a dispute comes up, the managing broker of that listing company can send out a 60-day letter saying we're going to refund the earnest money to so-and-so unless the buyer and seller can come to terms on it, or unless either one of them files a court order about the earnest. If you negotiate this to where the title company holds the earnest money, then you're not going to get that coverage. You're not going to get that, what I'm trying to say, device to use to get the earnest money back. Okay. If you negotiate it that the buyer's company holds the earnest money, most likely the buyer's managing broker is going to say our buyer gets to keep it. Now what are you going to do? So you're going to end up in court with that. So be sure that if you agree in your negotiations that the title company gets to hold the earnest money, make sure you get a copy of the earnest money or that escrow agreement from the title company and read it and see what happens if either party wants to back out of the transaction and keep the earnest money. Now, the good thing about, what I think is a good thing, you may think I'm crazy, but about the mutual release from a purchase agreement is that once both parties have signed a mutual release, even if they both want the earnest money for themselves, if the buyer wants it or if the seller wants it, but once both parties have signed separate mutual releases saying that we're not going to buy the home or we're not going to sell the home to this party, then the house can go back on the market. And so if there's an earnest money dispute, if the buyer wants to keep the earnest money, the seller wants to keep the earnest money, and they both sign mutual agreements, mutual agreements and virtue. Mutual releases, I'll get it out sometime. Then the seller can go ahead and put the house back on the market, even if there's a dispute about the earnest money. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind when you're working with buyers or sellers about what can and cannot happen. That will cover the rest of this stuff. Oh, section G of page 2, lines 88 through 93. The seller concessions, seller shall provide an allowance of up to X number of dollars or percent of the purchase price to be meet by the buyer. What our company is making known to us now, and has for the last several months, is that not only can you ask for like $2,500 in buyer closing costs, but if you ask for that 2,500 or any portion thereof to be used as a rate buy down, then that's gonna save the buyer even that much more money. So that 2,500 becomes a lot more money if it's negotiated as a rate buy down, an interest rate buy down, rather than as a closing cost. So when the mortgage lender comes in here at noon, right after me, then ask him about that. And Mark will can explain that to you, and Mark Kujic can explain that to you a lot better than I can. Then section 2 on that line 91, that's where you get paid. So if you leave it as a blank, you could get bit. So that's when you would put in your percentage of, or flat fee of how much commission the seller is going to pay. To move down, and again, I'm skipping over a lot of this, but again, because Doug, I know will cover it. If you go to line 106, it's in the contingency section. A contingency can be just on the seller having to sell their own home. I mean, sorry, the buyer having to sell their home first before they can move on this. If they write it up as a first right or as a limited purchase contingency, then your seller needs to know that the house is gonna stay on the market. If it's a first right, but does everybody understand what a first right does and how it works? Okay. Since I didn't see 5 hands go up, the first right basically tells the buyer and the seller that we've agreed to a purchase price of $200,000, whatever it is. Just throwing that out as a number. But we have to sell our house first, and we're gonna negotiate 2 days in there. So what happens is, you submit the first right to Ashley. She records it as a first right on the VLC. It has to be disclosed that way. And so any future buyers would look at that, or buyer agents and buyers, and say they're the first right on this house, but that's okay, we want it, we're wanting to wait whatever time frame it is to get it, see if we can get it, so we're gonna put through an offer anyway. And so the seller negotiates another offer under the contingent that they're negotiating behind the first right offer. And so they get the second deal put together. Then the seller's agent immediately calls the buyer agent, sends them an email, text, whatever. And says, we've accepted another house per the backup agreement that we have with you. Or the first right, I'm sorry, for the first right agreement that we have with you. You now have 2 days, 3 days, 1 day, whatever, to put up or shut up, is what it amounts to. Forgive my creativity, but that's what it is. So the first buyer that is holding the first right can either release the contingency, and that's what we have a removal of contingency form for. There's a form for just about everyone. Or they can go ahead and move forward. If they release the contingency, then the second offer that the seller has accepted becomes the primary offer. I said that. If the first buyer removes the contingency, then they're moving forward with it. But if the first buyer cannot finance the second house until they sell it first, then the second offer becomes primary. And the first buyer gets their earnest money and goes away. And I did a very poor job of explaining that, but does it make any sense? Okay, you're all being very gracious and I appreciate it. With a limited purchase agreement or a limited purchase contingency, right? We used to call them on line 108, 109, 108. We used to call that a drop dead. That does not have to be disclosed anymore, used to, but it doesn't anymore. What that says is we're gonna put together, the first buyer comes along, we're gonna put together a first limited purchase contingency, right? And have that memorized and recorded. And that says that we've got a purchase agreement put together, but we still can't move forward to buy the home just yet because we still have to sell our house. Another offer comes along, seller negotiates it, and then they tell the first buyer, go away, we're done with you, we've accepted the other one. It's different than a first right in that there is no time frame. So for that reason, it doesn't have to be disclosed as a contingency. Okay. So somebody's gonna ask me sooner or later, or they're gonna ask Doug, preferably, what is the point of a limited purchase contingency right? Beats me. Actually, it's done so that you have an offer in place, you know you're about to sell your house. And you just want to get something on the books, and that's all the seller's willing to do, so you go ahead and do that. Because the house has been on the market for 3 months, 6 months, or whatever, it's not likely anything else is gonna come along. You want to have your offer in place or an offer on the house in place. That's why you would do the limited agency contingency. Okay, wire fraud on top of page 3 is just what it says it is. We've already talked about that. The flood area, section K, line 151. Line 154, buyer may or may not terminate this agreement if property requires flood insurance. Not if it's been disclosed. So if on the VLC or in the contract back and forth negotiations, you disclose, the seller discloses that the home is in a floodplain, the buyer cannot then come along after the purchase agreement is put together and accepted, that the buyer cannot then come along and say we want out because of the floodplain. Okay, but if it's never been disclosed, yeah, they can get out for that. Same thing with any other defect. And while I'm at it with these, if you get a buyer that says there is no way we're gonna buy a house that has mold in it, or even has ever had mold, even if it's been mitigated, or the seller agrees to mitigate it, there's no way we're gonna buy a house like that. Because I have respiratory problems, I've always had respiratory problems, my kids have respiratory problems. So there's no way we could ever buy a house with that kind of risk. So you go see a house, you'll love it, it's not been disclosed that there's been mold in it. You get the deal put together, the inspection comes back, yeah, there has to be mold in the attic. What do you do now? Because the seller says that's fine, we're gonna mitigate the mold and take care of it. But the buyer has already told you, under no circumstances are we gonna buy a house that has ever had mold or have mold now. And the purchase agreement says that you have to give the seller the right to fix the problem on inspection. So now what do you do? Well, you keep that in the back of your mind. You put that in your buyer's consultation to understand that the buyer will not buy a house under those conditions. And so then in further conditions, you put, if mold found or has ever existed in home, buyer reserves the right to avoid the contract. And that's what one of the things that further conditions are for. To make sure that you can still get out of it that way. Because as I said earlier, the seller has the right to fix problems. You have to give them that right. You can't just walk away if mold's found or whatever. Okay, so that's how you get around that. So that's how, or why knowing your buyer is so critical. Building use limitation to be have an investor or, an owner, a buyer, a regular buyer that wants to set a daycare in their house, or like it used to be, the neighbor across the street from me had a car detailing business going in their driveway. Nobody cared, it was one car at a time. Neighbors didn't care what they were doing, but my living in an old neighborhood. And nobody out there with a cleaning rag and the shop vac is gonna disrupt the neighborhood, so we didn't care about the car detailing. Now, if they had a car repair business, where they were stacking up 10 cars at a time along the street and doing major overhaul work, yeah, we'd have blocked it then. So that's why section L, line 156, building use limitations. Buyer's intended use for the property is a single family owner occupied rental or others. You know, that's where the other comes in. So if you know that your buyer wants to use it as a daycare, then you would put in there, daycare, for example. And that way, if the purchase agreement gets put together and accepted, buyer finds out that the area is not zoned for daycare, nor will it be, then the buyer has the right then to walk away and get their ends like that. So again, know your buyers. The rest of this pretty much Doug will cover on that page, page 4. The environmental contaminants release, buyer and seller knowledge of listing broker, selling broker, and all licensees associated with broker are not experts and have no special training, knowledge, or whatever. That's true if you don't. But we get a lot of new agents coming in out of the construction industries and other areas where they do have that knowledge. And so if you, as a buyer's agent, used to be a mold mitigation expert, then you would have to disclose that in further conditions. If you don't, then you don't. But a lot of this is hold harmless for you as the buyer's agent. We used to have our managing broker used to be a licensed attorney. And so he had different knowledge and specialized knowledge that most managing brokers don't have. In certain circumstances, that had to be disclosed. The rest of the list, and Doug will cover very well. Something I want to point out on page 5, line 291. Pursuant to federal and state law, seller cannot make seller selection of a title insurance provider a condition of this agreement. The buyer has the right to choose the title company. So you can go through negotiations, you can go through 10 counters if you want to. The most I've ever had is 13, and buyer and seller were just playing with each other at that point. And they were wasting my time and the listing agent's time, but anyway. No matter how many counters you go through, you cannot make seller selection of the title company the last item, because the buyer has the right to select the title company. So you get a listing and you go through one of our title companies, Summit Title, for example, they do great work. They've done work for me. But whoever the title company is that you do your preliminary title with on your listing contract, you should do preliminary title. And so the title company has invested time and effort into putting together a title package where the listing agent can read it and see if there's any defects or any claims or any liens on title or anything else. So the title companies put it together for the listing agent. Buyer comes along, they want to select a different title company. Do they have that right? Yes, they do. So what a lot of agents will do is in, the BLC under agent to agent remarks. Is they will put in their preliminary title done by X title company, and the preliminary title is attached as a disclosure on the BLC. And so most agents, most buyer agents, when they see that, will go ahead and accept that title work. Because for one thing, it already shows them exhibit B and exhibit A as to what liens there may or may not be on the home. And so the buyer's agent can immediately go to that work and get done preliminarily through another title company. Now, there may be buyer's agents, you may be as a buyer's agent that for one reason or another, you still insist on your own title company. You have that right, if a buyer does. Line 294, seller agrees to pay the cost of obtaining all documents necessary to perfect the title, including the cost of the close of the deed and vendor's affidavit, so that marketable title can be conveyed. I just had that done with Summit Title because my house at one point was in my in-law's name, and then it was in my wife's name, and then in my wife's and my name. And then my wife died about 4 years ago. And so I had to get clear title on my house so that if I choose to sell it, I can go ahead and sell it. So I had to perfect the title and pay the cost of doing so. So that's where that's going. Where you're gonna find this also is in foreclosed properties. And for years, most of my business was listing foreclosures, and so going through the title work was paramount. I had to do it, and I had to go through it and make sure that the foreclosure attorneys picked up on every lien that was out there against the property. If it wasn't, we had to send it back to the foreclosure attorneys to get all the liens cleared up so that we could sell marketable title. So most times you won't run into that, but if you run into it, if you're doing a foreclosure or anything like that, you want to go ahead and get the title work. If you're the buyer's agent, you can see it ahead of time. And make sure there's no liens on the property. If you're the listing agent, you absolutely want to do preliminary title. Prorations and special assessments. When you're going through the purchase agreement, make sure that you understand that some things are done on calendar days, some things are done on business days, some things are done day of closing, some things are done day of possession. They're all outlined in the purchase agreement, so make sure you understand that for your buyers, because the last thing you want to do is have the buyers not put utilities on in their name before closing, and then the closing happens, the seller's already turned off the electricity. We get a storm, the sump pump won't run, and now the basement's full of water. And because the buyer didn't bother to put utilities in their name, guess who the buyer is gonna come back to and say, you didn't tell me about this on time. Even though they have it in writing, they're still gonna rely on you to give them a timeline as to when they need to call AES or Duke or whoever it is and get the utilities on. True in the wintertime too, for gas and heat, you don't want broken pipes, that's not cheap to fix. And yes, I do know about that too. Okay, line 332, I'm giving you this form in your packet, which we'll get to in just a moment. But if you're gonna withdraw any offers, for example, you've put in an offer, your buyer calls you up and says, we're moving to Springfield, Illinois, get that offer off the table. There is a form for that, a withdrawal of offer form, that you immediately send to the listing agent and say, we're withdrawing our offer. Then you don't really have to give an explanation, you can just say we're withdrawing it, assuming that they haven't accepted your offer and you add it back to the buyer's agent. The listing side can do this as well. They get an offer from a buyer, they've agreed to it right before they put it in the email, they get another offer that's better, fewer conditions, higher price. they would send a withdrawal of offer, to the buy side, that we don't want to do this. We're gonna go with a different offer instead, and I'll show you that form. Line 354, buyer acknowledges in the neighborhood there are conditions which others may find objectionable. Buyer shall therefore be responsible for being fully acquainted with the neighborhood and shall and other offsite conditions that could affect the property. Yeah, I've got a war story about that too. But the thing is, it's up to the buyer to understand what neighborhood they're buying into. Investors don't care too much, but homeowners, owner occupants do. And so it's not up to you to say this is a great neighborhood. It's up to you to point out in the next page that there is a website to find out if there's any sex offenders in the neighborhood. There's a website to find out if the home has ever been a meth lab. Yes, I sold one of those. Didn't know it at the time, but found out later. So it's up to the buyer to determine whether or not the neighborhood suits the buyer, not you. So make sure you don't say anything as you and your kids will love it here, the playground right across the street, the school's 2 blocks down the road. This is gonna be the best place for you and your family. Don't ever make a statement like that. Let them come to the conclusion that that's where they want to be. One of my personal favorites, under fair housing, section Y. Parties acknowledge that Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. And in bold, due to fair housing risks, brokers will not prepare, review, or submit personal information letters, including photographs from buyers itself. Used to be that we advocated love letters or fashion letters or whatever you want to call them. And they would put in there, we want to buy your house, we'd be the perfect occupant for your home. Here's a picture of me and my family on our latest fishing expedition in the Gulf. No, no, and no, and no, don't do that because that could violate fair housing. Especially if they are color photos. Stay away from those things, and this says that we cannot submit them. So if you're listing a house and you get one of these letters, you do not have to submit that to your buyer, your seller. Okay. Just stay away from it. Additional provisions, line 372, there has been underground mining in Indiana. So watch out for that, that should be disclosed. So, yes, ma'am.
If you're on the site, or like, listing something, you do the offer like that, you still present the offer, just a deposit.
You present the offer, yeah, but you do not by law submit the law letter or what you want to follow. Thank you.
So where's that line drawn? You know, I know obviously it kind of says like race, sex, origin, but so if someone was like, okay, I have this family, first time home buyers looking to grow their family, is that technically discriminating based on familial status if you're saying, oh, they're about to have a kid?
It can be.
Yeah.
And what is the reason for telling the sellers that?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, yes.
You know, the reason they used to use those things was to get an edge and over another seller or buyer. But as you can see, that's a quicksand for it, especially for you as a buyer's agent. And the buyer can come back to you and say, well, why didn't you submit the letter? Well, now you can show them that Indiana code, whatever, it says we don't do that anymore. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I was just curious.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be a very popular thing, especially when there were multiple offers on homes. But most agents now are getting away from those things. They don't want to get bit like their housing or anything else for that matter. Line number 5, conveyance, on page 7. Number 5, conveyance of this property shall be by general warranty deed or whatever. Most people would put in their best deed available, or they would put in NA there instead of that. Problem is that an REO, real estate owned foreclosure, simple, cannot give a general warranty deed. They can only give a, I think it's a special warranty deed. And so you're not gonna get a general warranty deed if you're doing a foreclosed home, an REO. So if you're on the list inside and you get this offer and that is left blank, or somebody has put in NA in there, and you know that your property is a foreclosure, then you automatically have to generate a counter offer countering that off. Because otherwise you're liable for coming up with a general warranty deed on a property that cannot give a general warranty deed. And so it gets a little sticky in contract to close. So that's why I said back in the beginning of the class that when you get an offer, your counter offer is going to be to clean up your counter offer number 1, among other things, is to clean up all the blanks or things like this that can't happen. Okay. Along with the challenging the purchase price and whatever else. Assignments. Line 394. Legal representation, successors is assigned. Buyer may not assign this agreement without consent of the seller. Who has ever heard of wholesale real estate? Eddie, you know what it is? I'm not trying to put you on the
No,
spot.
I don't know the legal definition, but
My only point of bringing that up is that with wholesaling, they use their own purchase agreements. And so one of the things the wholesalers put in their purchase, they don't use this form, they had attorneys write up their own. And they would put, seller agrees that buyer may assign this property. Instead of giving the buyer or the seller the opportunity to counter that. So with a wholesaler, and sometimes with normal traditional buyers and sellers, they don't want the name of the buyer disclosed because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to negotiate a better offer for them. For example, if you were to list Daniel Jones's house, maybe this guy is going to be worth millions, and or you representing him as a buyer, I should say. And the seller sees Daniel Jones's name come across there, and they'll say he's worth 17 million. Surely he can afford another 500,000 on the price of our house. And so by having it in there that the buyer can be assigned afterwards is how you get away with negotiating for big name people like that, celebrities, sports figures, CEOs of major corporations, anybody that the name would be obvious to some other person, or for whatever reason they don't want their name disclosed. Like judges and whatnot probably don't want their names disclosed because they don't want to be able to be found that easily. So to keep the negotiations honest and to keep names from being disclosed, you would use an assignment or a straw buyer, as also call them. Okay. I would love to talk about the rest of this book, but as well, so I won't go over what he's gonna do. Further conditions. This is where we would put in there, there's an appraisal gap where attaching it as is an amendment of first right, closing costs. We're asking for $600 in closing costs, even though you've already put that in on whatever page that was, whatever line that was. you could still mention to the seller to notify or request it $2,500. The inspection dollar limit, oftentimes we will see things like buyer will not ask seller to pay for any single item in the inspection costing less than $1,000 or $2,000 or $500. Whatever number the buyer's agent makes up based on what the house looks like. Or how strong that you want the offer to be. Because by putting everything else in here, the buyer wants this, the buyer wants that, buyer wants the other, the buyer wants a few more things, and then the seller gets another offer that's cleaner than that. That says the seller or the buyer might not be asking for all this stuff. We're gonna negotiate strictly on price and nothing else. And then that's a better, cleaner offer for that buyer, seller to look at. Most likely they're gonna go that direction, but if those things are important to your buyer, you don't want to give up inspections. I would never write an offer that says buyer gonna waive inspections. Unless the seller happened to be a contractor and they've already looked over the house. Or they're buying it to level the house anyway, because the lot is worth more than the house. And they want to tear the whole thing down and put in a new home anyway. In those two cases, and this is Mark speaking, not the law, that I would be more than willing to write an offer that said no inspections, but other than that, I wouldn't. Personally. Then they can seek the right of an attorney. Line 448, they've had agency explained, again, you went through that with your license law class to the extent. And that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover on the purchase agreement that Doug Walsh covered. So we will fill in the blanks that I left. And ask him these questions when we break up from class, if you have any questions for me, find them and write them all here or save them for Doug tomorrow. And say that bow's on Mark. Yeah. I'm surprised I haven't been that in that hole yet. Counter offer, this is where you would, I'm just giving you this. As I was said earlier, anything that's not countered is accepted on a purchase agreement. With the inspections, it's just the opposite. Anything countered on the inspections, you don't need to get. Mutual release from the purchase agreement, I've talked about this. The earnest money is often disputed, and even so, you can still put the house back on the market, assuming that the buyer and seller have each signed a mutual release, giving them, each party, the earnest money. Withdrawal of offer or counter offer, went over this. The undersigned hereby withdraws the offer or the counter offer prior to acceptance of delivery of such acceptance. Addendum to purchase agreement or backup offer, excuse me. This is where it says that if you have an offer accepted, the seller does, and it hasn't closed yet, the buyer can still put in a backup offer if the seller is willing to negotiate. If they are, then the offer gets negotiated. It's not like a first right where there's a time frame. With this, it's just simply a backup offer. It means that if the seller doesn't close on the primary house, on the primary offer, and the primary offer goes away, then your offer that's been negotiated with the seller as backup becomes the primary offer, and then you move forward according to the time frame. This can also be withdrawn, but it's also on line 11. This backup offer shall remain in full force and effect for a period of X number of days from the day of this addendum. So you can, like, if you're showing a buyer a bunch of houses and they find one they really, really like, but it's already got an accepted offer on it, and that's why you would still show them pendings, and you would show them, but you could bring them to their attention. If they really, really liked it, they like the pictures, they're really serious about this home, or they've seen it, and right before they get their offer accepted, then another offer gets accepted, or they've seen the home and, they really like it, and for whatever reason, they couldn't put an offer in at that time, but now they can. They would ask the seller, are you willing to accept a backup offer? If the seller says yes, then you can put this backup offer together, use this addendum with it, negotiate it, and then at that point, after it's negotiated, you deliver the earnest money. You don't have to deliver earnest money to be accepted. Then this would become the backup offer. Hopefully the first offer will go away if you've done this. And then this becomes an effect. That's what that's about. Escalation clause says you should.
You should.
Yeah. But you don't have to have earnest money to have an acceptable. You can negotiate 0. If it's not delivered in time, then you can walk away. Either party can walk away. We'll talk about that in just a moment. I think we just talked about backup offers. That they're not like first right offers in that there's a 2-day time frame or a 1-day time frame you negotiate. It's simply a backup to whatever time frame you want. And then the buyers can walk away from that. They would send the seller a release. We don't want to be the backup offer anymore. We've got another house we like, and we're going to go after that one instead, so you can release it. The escalation clause says that, I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it on your own. Excuse me. But the escalation clause says that we are willing to pay more than your highest offer in X number of dollar increments up to a cap of X. So seller accepts a $300,000 offer from the home, and you want to put it in, or has sent out. Let me change that. The seller has got multiple offers on a home. When you put in your, and it's called for multiple offer, they come for highest and best. So you can submit that, or you can submit this with just the first time you submit an offer, whether the seller has any other offers or anything else going on the house, doesn't matter. You fill this out and say, we are willing to pay up to $300,000 for the house in $2,000 increments if you can prove to us that that's what we have to, that your highest and best from some other buyer is $300,000. So seller then gets other offers coming in. If you're the only one, then they counter this off. And they say that the addendum, the escalation clause is no longer part of the purchase agreement. But if there are multiple offers on the house, seller comes back to you and says, we have accepted a $280,000 offer on the house. And let me change my numbers. House is listed for $300,000. You offer $250,000. Seller comes in and says, we have accepted a $280,000 on the house. You have come in here with this, with your $250,000 offer. You've attached this to it and said we'll go up to $300,000 in $2,000 increments. I'm trying. She's still recording. Yes, I messed up. Thank you, Chris. So what happens is seller comes in to you, you've offered $250,000 on $300,000. They come back to you and say, we've accepted it, a $280,000 house. So you would be obligated to go up to that $280,000 if you do this. If the seller can prove to you, and they would give you a redacted purchase. Line 21 says a redacted purchase agreement under or escalating offers to justify the purchase price increase. problem you're running into is what happens if two people send them one of you at the same price. At that point, the seller would still go back to whatever conditions you've asked for. Have you asked for a warranty? Are you willing to waive $2,000 worth of inspection? Or can you close next month? Are you writing a cash offer or are you writing an FHA offer? And things like that. The seller can still accept any offer. If your offer is twice what anybody else has offered, they can still accept the lower offer. That's up to the seller. And so the seller's agent doesn't have to prove to you that you were the highest best. Seller can do whatever they want to do based on the terms and conditions that you're offering. And that's where those love letters will come into play that we're not allowed. Because if the seller sees your happy family and they don't see another happy family, then maybe they would be tempted to go with a happy family and you're into a fair housing issue. So that's another reason those things have been eliminated by law. And all I can say is I'm glad they have. But another important part of this, if the escalation clause is to be used and if the seller is using that to justify coming back at you for a higher price, they have to write, according to line 50, they have to submit to you a buyer's counter offer. So they have to come back to you with a counter offer and with the redacted purchase agreement that says the other buyer is willing to pay the 208. Lease property addendum, this is a great one that just came out this year. Used to be that you had to put all this in federal conditions. But if you're writing an offer on a home that has tenants in it, you want to fill this out. And fill out, read every line, fill it out. Seller, line 13, seller agrees to not to renew any leases or enter into any new lease agreements beyond the terms of those already established as the date of the accepted offer. And so it means that the seller can't, after you get an accepted purchase agreement, the seller can come back and renegotiate with the tenants a new lease. That now it's, once you get the offer accepted, a new lease is now up to you. Possessions on line 17 will be subject to tenant's rights. So whatever lease the tenant has with the current seller is still enforced and cannot be undone by the buyer. But the buyer says that the seller cannot negotiate a new lease with the tenant after you get this deal put together. So, and then security deposits paid by the tenants to the seller, the one line 21 shall be submitted to buyers in full, and that's usually done at closing. So if you have a situation where you are buying a rented house, make sure you fill out that form, whether it's going to be owner occupied or whether you're buying it to be the next landlord or whatever, doesn't matter. Okay, the next form is no buyer tenant agency relationship acknowledged. The undersigned agrees as follows: buyer tenant is not being represented by in this transaction by a real estate licensee. Buyer tenant does not consent to limited agency, therefore parties agree listing broker is only representing the seller in the seller's interests. So that means what it says. It means if a buyer comes to buy the house, they don't have an agent, they don't want you as the agent, they don't want an agent, they don't agree to limited agency, which will put you as their agent, then you have them sign this document. And that covers your hiney in case anything goes wrong with it. If they come back to you and say, you didn't represent our interest, well, then you've shown this form that that's signed and say, yeah, because you didn't want to use an agent. It doesn't happen very often, it does happen. I've seen, oh gosh, probably 10 of these in my career. So again, they're rare. Multiple offer notification is just what we talked about earlier. And that it covers the multiple offer situation, that it says basically that the seller sends us out, says we received X number of offers, 2 or more, that's what it says. You've got until noon Sunday to come up with your highest and best offer. Sight unseen, this will bite you sooner or later. But it means that the buyer is buying a house they haven't seen. Typically, you'll get this from out of state investors, typically. Or if somebody, if a CEO from a major corporation is moving into this area and they know that they've already visited the area, they've already seen a few homes. They found one they like. But another one has come on the market that they haven't seen, but pretty much looks like one of the other ones, then you might fill this out. And this gets them in the door, but they can't, we're on the side unseen. But this gets them in the door, so where they can at least get an offer put together, they can't back out on based on, inspection, well, they can't on a negotiated inspection, but not on something that was disclosed. Or that they could have seen by walking through a house, but they can still back out based on inspection that uncovers undisclosed defects. But this, when I was listing foreclosures, I was in Vegas, I think, for a family reunion. And I had another agent working for me here in town, in Keller Williams. And I got a new property on Main Street, I forget what street it was. And so I asked him, I said, can you go take pictures for me so I can do a BBO? And so, one night after all the, family reunion, sessions, I went back to my room, looked at the pictures, did a BPO, a broker price opinion. Well, the problem is the agent that I asked to do the forms didn't turn around from the front porch and take a picture of the defunct factory across the street. And so my BPO, my broker price opinion, came in an awful lot higher than it would have had I known that factory was there. And I blame myself for that because when you do a price opinion, they want to see the surrounding area too. So I lost the listing because I couldn't get the offers up high enough, or nobody wanted to make it a high enough offer on the house that was sitting across from the defunct factory. So that's where sight unseen kind of come into place too. I actually had my price opinion based on sight unseen from the same. And it did not turn out well.
So in that same scenario where you're talking about the executive that wants to come in and knows the area and all of that kind of stuff, and they want to do a sight unseen, would you not need this then if as their representative, you said, I know you can't get to the area, let me do a FaceTime tour with you and walk you through the house so you can at least see it before we put in an offer? Then would you need this or no?
Probably not,
Okay.
but you would put in the purchase agreement. Seller is relying on FaceTime, presentation or walkthrough, yeah.
Okay.
And you would put that in the purchase agreement under further conditions, and then you would also underneath that put seller reserves right to reject home based on things not seen in the FaceTime presentation.
Okay.
Now, sounds good from the buyer side, but if you're on the listing side, you're gonna look at that and go, what? And you're probably gonna counter most of that offer there.
Okay.
In which case, then the buyer's agent would probably say, okay, that didn't work, so let's try the side and see.
Okay.
So that's where you get into the negotiation. I mean, I'm giving you examples of what may or may not work, but again, you never know what the other side's gonna say.
Yeah.
You may not have that family sitting in the living room and is listening to the buyers. Buyer's notice of termination, the buyer can walk away under 2 conditions. Buyer has not received a signed release from seller's primary purchase agreement, buyer may terminate as indicated in buyer's backup offer. So if you've done a backup offer and the seller has not sent you a release and you want to walk away anyway, then you can use this form to walk away. That's how you get out of the backup offer. An inspection has revealed previously undisclosed defect in buyers within a time frame provided in the as-is addendum. I think the as-is addendum is coming up. And I'll cover it now. What the as-is addendum says, if you use it as is, and as-is addendum are two different things. If you put home sold as is, but you do not attach the as-is addendum, then you can still ask for repairs. However, if the as-is addendum has been signed and agreed to, you can't. So the as-is addendum says buyer still has the right to have the home inspected. If they find anything not disclosed, the buyer has the right to walk away, not to ask for repairs. So that's where this comes into effect. An inspection has revealed previously undisclosed defect and buyers within a time frame that's provided in the as-is addendum. So the buyer does the inspection, they find a broken sewer main or some kind of thing out front. The as-is inspection form or the as-is addendum says the buyer can't ask for that. The buyer is not willing to move forward with a broken sewer line. They don't want to spend the money, or they don't have the money, or the home's not going to pass FHA or VA anyway. They would use this form instead of a normal mutual release to get out. They can still use a mutual release, but a mutual release relies on the seller signing it. This says we're getting out of it anyway. We don't need seller's signature on it. Okay. The addendum, the first right contingency, I've talked about that a lot already today, so go ahead and read through it on your own. If you have any questions about it, please come by me or Doug, or ask me your team here on the team. Appraisal gap coverage says that if the home doesn't appraise, the buyer has the right to walk away. Seller can choose to come down on price, but they don't have to. The buyer can choose to offer more to cover the appraisal gap, but they don't have to. And that's pretty much what this is. It says buyer on line 10. Buyer is not required to pay more than the agreed upon purchase price. Neither party is required to proceed with a decreased purchase price. Parties may mutually agree to amend the agreed upon purchase price and proceed towards closing, or either party may terminate the purchase agreement by mutual release. So that's the appraisal gap, and that does happen. Fairly regularly. Seller's notice of termination. There are 5 ways here for the seller to terminate without going through a full mutual release. Buyer failed in time to submit the earnest money. So if you've negotiated 2 business days, not 2 calendar days, but 2 business days on your earnest money, make sure you reward it that way. And the buyer doesn't come across or brings it on the, does not come across on the 2 days. Seller gets a better offer, they're going to probably send you one of these and say, why do we accept a better offer? Because we have the right to walk away because you did not deliver the needs done. Now, if you've got calendar days on there, and then you would go on calendar day, business days or business days. They're also called banking days. Buyer failed to time and submit cash proof of funds, so even with a cash offer, you still have to have cash proof of funds. And there's a section on the purchase agreement that says how fast they have to get those proof of funds to the seller. Number C, buyer serves an inspection response requesting credits in violation of the as-is addendum. And so again, you've got the as-is addendum put together, the buyer submits a list of repairs, says, and fills this out, checks item C, we're done. Point D, seller closed on the primary transaction, which terminates a buyer's backup offer. So if you've got a backup offer in place, and the primary goes ahead and closes, and the seller would send you this, and you get buyer the clearance like that. Or point E, seller accepted another offer, which terminates the limited purchase contingency, right? That's the one I call the drop dead first right. Again, which doesn't have to be disclosed in the DLC. And so if you've got a purchase limited purchase contingency right in place, you've got it accepted, seller gets a better offer, negotiates it, the seller sends you this, and says you've done. As this purchase agreement is what I just said, the seller, one thing I want to point out to you though, on line 21, seller acknowledges and agrees that selling the property as is, does not relieve the seller from applicable legal obligations to disclose any and all known material defects in the property and the improvements therein or thereon, if any, to the buyer. But seller has no obligation to correct any identified defects. So again, the seller has to acknowledge and disclose any known defects. You as an agent, if you see known defects around the house, things that you were qualified to talk about, then you have the right, you have to disclose them to the buyer. And that's a 2-page form, and that takes me to finish.
30 minutes.
Yeah, 30
You
minutes.
get a break.
Any questions, comments? Anybody got a good story to tell? Anybody want to pass out donuts?
Mark Kuchik should be bringing in lunch for his session. Usually pizza or something like that. He brings something in.
And again, I'm in right down here from 5 a.m. or 5:15 a.m. till about 10:30 or 11. And always reach me at home because I have no life of any kind. So by all means, find me if you want to talk to me, but seriously, I enjoy answering questions and helping them.
No matter how dumb they are, you answer. It's great.
It's dumb, I've done worse. That's the only way I learn.
You'll never stop learning.
Yes.
Ever, ever.
Yeah.
You'll think you're like, oh, I'm experienced. Mm-mm.
We had something bolt in at the last office across the street. But I would listen to other agents negotiating purchase agreements and everything. They didn't have phones and cell phones. And I would listen to all the agents negotiating purchase agreements and everything else and inspection, and that's how I learned. And then I took every class that I could afford and all the free ones. And got myself all the alphabet letters after your name and then dropped most of them because they cost $150 or more per year to maintain, and they weren't.
Talking about accreditations, right?
I still have a few. But the only way you learn is by asking and talking and being around people and other agents that are doing this. And each of you in your teams, you'll do things slightly different than the other agents are doing it, but you'll still follow the law and any KW policies that they're. And then again, I'm more than happy to. My contact information is on the business card. The only thing wrong on there is the address and no.
I hope so.
For those that don't know, we just moved here in October from across the street. Literally across the street.
The big street, but
Like the Meridian Street, yes, that way.
Foreign persons and what that entails. What was the other thing? So, oh, the rate.
Can you pass that to Crystal? Thanks. That's fine. That's fine. Yep. Just make sure you're signing in. Where's that sign-in sheet?
here.
Yeah, it helps us just know that helps you qualify for what is called floor time. That means you can be floor time is like kind of an old school phrase where if people call in and they don't have an agent, if you're on floor time, the call will go to you. And so you have qualifications for floor time, and taking Ignite is one of them. And that's what helps us understand who's finished Ignite and stuff like that. So, yep.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.